So welcome. First, we will hear from experts on Social Security policy about solutions that have been proposed in Washington. So these are things that Washington are talking about, and we would like to get some further information about those subjects and your reaction. Each of our three guests will start with about 5 minutes to summarize their points of view about these solutions that are now on the table. So I want to introduce them to you. Virginia Reno from the National Academy of Social Insurance on the far end. Welcome, Virginia. Romina Baccia from the Heritage Foundation. Welcome. And John Hista from AARP. John, welcome. David Holthaus, the editor page for the Cincinnati Enquirer, will be asking some questions and moderating this panel discussion about the possible solutions that are being proposed to strengthen Social Security for today's seniors and future generation. I think they're talking about us.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Appreciate your attendance and your interest. We're here to talk about Social Security. It's a foundational program in our country. It was started in 1935 under the FDR administration and is really considered the first major piece of the social safety net in the U.S. But it's in trouble. The last trustees report came out earlier this year, said that Social Security's trust fund has 20 years left to live. So that means this great program could be insolvent by the age of 98. So we're here tonight to talk about solutions, and we've got a panel of experts to do that. I just want to say that we're not planning to take questions from the audience tonight. You will have a chance at the end of the program to weigh in with your clickers on the proposals we talk about. So we won't be taking questions tonight, I'm sorry. So it's a complex problem. Fortunately, there are some solutions that have been proposed, and that's what we'd like to talk about tonight. We'll take on some of the major policy proposals that have been talked about in DC and elsewhere. And as Virginia mentioned, one of them is paying for it. One of the proposals is to reduce the shortfall in Social Security by raising the earnings cap on Social Security collections. Currently, there is a cap of $113,700 in earnings under which Social Security taxes are collected to fund the trust fund. So why not simply raise this cap to pick a number, 150,000 or something?
I would say there are good reasons to very seriously consider doing just that. One option, it's relatively new, but it has been introduced in Congress, is to gradually phase out this cap completely. Do it gradually over 10 years. And the facts of the matter are only 5 out of 100 American workers earn more than this cap. Everybody else pays into Social Security all year long, and their employers do too. That 5 out of 100, they stop paying when they reach the cap. So if they're a millionaire, they stop paying in January. And if they earn just a little over the cap, they stop paying around Thanksgiving or Christmas time. But to gradually phase that out completely over 10 years and provide modest, very modest additional benefits on those higher earnings. Because after all, you don't want to pay humongous benefits to millionaires, but very modest increments for seniors, for higher income workers. That would solve more than 70% of the short-term shortfall, or the long-term shortfall. It seems equitable and fair and effective.
Romina?
Thank you. So one question we should ask ourselves is, why is there even a cap? And the reason for that is it was so that nobody would receive excessively high benefits. If you completely eliminate the cap and, you can't hear me? Okay. If you completely eliminate the cap and then raise everyone's benefits based on their higher contributions, you could be looking at paying somebody $150,000 a year in Social Security benefits. That seems excessive for a government program. But the bigger issue here, too, is that let's think about what we think are reasonable tax rates to encourage people to work, to encourage people to build businesses and hire workers. And a analysis by the American Enterprise Institute done by Andrew Biggs showed if we eliminate the cap, whether or not we give wealthy income payers higher benefits or not, you're looking at having their tax rates, their marginal tax rates rise to 62%. And depending on the states they live in, they could face marginal tax rates of 68%. You're looking at taxing 2/3 of the income of certain income earners. I think that seems excessive. And the other issue is if you just raise the limit a little bit, let's say to try and cover 90% of earnings, which is often a target, you're looking at a tax increase for small businesses of $12,500. That is $12,500 that is not going towards making investments, hiring workers, giving salaries to existing workers. So tax increases always come with a cost. And think about what that would do. The money would come in, Social Security would collect surpluses, and what would Congress do with it? They wouldn't invest it. They wouldn't save it. They would spend it like they've spent all the previous decades' surpluses. And right again, we're in the cash flow hole within just a few years, so it doesn't fix the problem.
I would like to respond that if Social Security draws in more money than is used to pay current benefits, it is invested in Treasury bonds. And we've always been, throughout financial markets, we've always thought those are the most secure, safest investment in the world. Now, when our politicians play around with the debt limit, it raises questions about that. But still, the full faith and credit of the United States government essentially counts for something. They are invested in Treasury bonds. The fact that policymakers have not balanced the rest of the budget, and therefore, instead of reducing the federal debt by the Social Security Trust Fund's investments, they're simply spending money that they don't have for the rest of the government. That's where the irresponsibility lies, not in the Social Security program.
Romina?
I don't know if any of you heard the president threaten recently that because of the debt limit, Social Security benefits may be delayed. Did any of you hear that? Yeah. So if those securities are backed by the full faith and credit, which they are, why is the president telling people that they may not go out? Those are bonds that have a legitimate claim on government resources. The Social Security Trust Fund even allows the president to continue borrowing at the debt limit. There's no reason for those benefits to be delayed.
Would raising the cap necessarily mean increasing benefits?
It need not be increasing benefits. I mean, one could have very modest increases. Some proposals have, a small return and then almost a negligible return on, earnings above maybe $250,000 or something, so that benefits do not get excessively high. But the point is, and that I used to say it was not a good idea to raise the cap. I've changed my mind, actually, because first of all, we have a very important program. It needs the money. And second of all, we have a much greater inequality between the top income earners and everyone else. And a reasonable place to start in simply providing adequate financing for Social Security is to say everybody can pay that 6.2% of their earnings into the Social Security all year long, like 95% of Americans already do. They're doing this, but they're doing this not because they need a bigger pension. They're doing this because they live in a country where we want everybody to have basic modicum of security, financial security for their families and for their retirements. And that's one way to do it.
Okay. This is a similar question, a similar proposal, but different in that it would raise a much more revenue. But what about completely eliminating the cap on earnings so that all earnings would be subject to the payroll tax?
I think that's what I was. That's what gets you 90 or 70% of the gap filled.
Okay.
I think that before we raise taxes on small businesses and workers across the board, we should start looking at the 47,000 millionaires that are receiving benefits that really don't need them, and we could strengthen benefits for low-income workers and for vulnerable populations. Why are we helping them pay for their golf course membership?
I would answer.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Virginia.
That's an appealing question, and it deserves an answer. We're paying benefits to millionaires because they earned them in the Social Security system. The reality is, very rich don't get very rich benefits, and that's by design. You go after their benefits, and it solves 3 or 4% of the problem. You have them pay in all year long, and it saves 70% of the problem. We know how to raise revenues through the payroll tax, but tracking down millionaires and trying to take their benefits away through the tax system is just, it's small and inefficient.
Okay. Let's talk about another policy proposal that's out there. This one is about the chain-weighted consumer price index. Social Security payments now are adjusted annually using the consumer price index. This would change that index to assume that when the price of one product becomes too high, that consumers substitute a cheaper product. In other words, if the price of orange juice becomes too high, consumers may substitute apple juice for that. This would lower the cost of living adjustment slightly, but that amount would increase over time. What do we think about that? Romina, do you want to take that one?
So this is about the cost of living adjustment, or COLA, as you may know it. And what is the purpose of the COLA? It is to make sure that beneficiaries, recipients, are protected from inflation, so that when the price on goods changes, your benefits are able to buy the same basket of goods in the next year than you were able to in the year before. Now, Social Security has this index to make sure those benefits are protected that came about in 1975. Now, there is a more recent and accurate index available, the chain CPI. It is more accurate because it covers a larger portion of the population. 87% of the population, their purchases are captured in this new index. The older index, which we're currently using, only captures 32%, only 1/3 of the population. So it's a matter of accuracy, it's a matter of using the best, most updated index. And what's also important to understand is that even with the chain CPI, your benefits will still rise. We did the calculations at the Heritage Foundation. In 10 years, the average Social Security benefit would be $250 higher per month than it is today with the chain CPI. And this is another case where upper income beneficiaries benefit the most from the current overstated and outdated index. They benefit about twice as much as lower income workers do. Thank you.
Virginia?
Actually, there's also another consumer price index that is this consumer price index for the elderly, and it's done on an experimental basis, but it has consistently over time shown that the inflation experienced by the elderly is slightly higher than that of the general population. That's because, for two reasons really, that first of all, elderly people spend more out of their budgets for out-of-pocket health care expenses, and those expenses have been rising faster than average inflation for other stuff. Secondly, people living on relatively low incomes and fixed incomes have less latitude to make the substitutions that David referred to. And actually, the substitutions between apple and orange juice is already reflected in the current CPI. This would be broader substitutions across broader categories, such as food for heat products. And I think there's a case could be made that at lower income levels, which more often than not seniors are, you have less latitude to make those substitutions. So the current index is slightly less than the cost of living for seniors. Shifting to a chain CPI would make that matters worse. The CPI for the elderly would be more accurate for seniors.
John?
This is the one issue that, in the interest of full disclosure, I'll weigh in on, because we really do want to have this debate, that AARP has taken a position on publicly, and that some of you as members have probably heard, and with all due respect, Romina, I don't mean to gang up on you, but we are opposed to chain CPI for the simple fact, the reason is that it would reduce your COLA over the course of its lifetime. And just as importantly, every single politician in Washington, when they talk about preserving these programs, talks about not changing the benefits for current beneficiaries. And by putting this on the table, they are breaking their promise. Both conservatives and liberals state that they will not change benefits for current beneficiaries. So again, if they're going to do that, they need to change how they approach their conversation with you all and be a little bit more transparent and more honest about it. Because the only reason why it's on the table today, to Romina's point earlier, is that they're trying to find a way to candidly not pay back some of the $2.7 trillion hole that exists in the Social Security Trust Fund today. And so we are opposed to it. We've been opposed to it, and we'll continue to be opposed to it. But this is the only issue I'll weigh in on from that perspective tonight, because we do want to hear the debate back and forth with the other issues as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
May I
Go ahead.
respond as well?
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
So the elderly index, as Virginia mentioned, an experimental index, it tries to reflect higher healthcare costs and that seniors tend to have. They tend to spend more on healthcare than other populations, and that is very true. 1/3 of Social Security recipients, however, are not elderly. So there's a question whether that index would actually reflect their decisions much better. So there may have to be a discussion over maybe separating out those groups, but then you have, depending on where you live, you experience a different cost of living. If you live in an urban center or a rural center, your cost of living will be very different. So what Congress is trying to do is protect everyone across the board from inflation, eroding the value of their benefits in the most cost-efficient way and using the best index. And this debate over chain CPI is not just over Social Security. It's about over the tax code, it's over other benefit programs. It's for the government to use the most updated measure of inflation to reflect both how it taxes and how it spends.
One minor rejoinder on, it's true that some percentage, 30% of beneficiaries are not seniors. The vast majority of those are people with disability, or disabled individuals who are unable to work because of disability, and their health care spending patterns are very similar to those of seniors. And their other income is often smaller because they're less likely to have pensions.
Okay, why don't we move on to life expectancy and raising the retirement age. People are living longer. We expect that they will continue to live longer, we hope. So why not raise the retirement age at which we can receive full Social Security benefits to be more in line with how long people are living now? Virginia?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One reason is that we've already done that. We're in the process of raising it from 65 to 67, and that does gradually lower benefits for retirees below what they otherwise would have been. It's about 6 or 7% lower for every 1 year increase in the retirement age. Now, so we've done that. What we haven't done is do anything to match the benefit reduction that represents with any additional revenue that could be scheduled out into the future to cover the costs. A second reason to pause about raising the retirement age is that studies have shown that gains in life expectancy are not shared equally. And greater gains are enjoyed by higher income workers, and lower income workers have seen much smaller or no increases in life expectancy. So to use an increase in average life expectancy would increase disparities between high and low income retirees.
Thank you. Romina?
Since Social Security's inception, Americans are living a lot longer across the board, and all groups are living somewhat longer, but there are disparities. I agree with Virginia there. But there's other disparities as well, so I think we should look more broadly at how can we make sure that those vulnerable, low-income populations oftentimes have adequate benefits, and to make sure we target those directly and strengthen their benefits. But when it comes to the retirement age, that applies across the board. And so, for example, people can now expect to draw benefits from Social Security for about 20 years. That was unheard of at program inception. People didn't draw benefits for that long, and that is also adding to Social Security strain and is making it weaker to make sure it's around for future generations, and especially for those seniors who really depend on those benefits. So I think that raising the retirement age to reflect the fact that we are living longer makes sense. To be able to draw benefits longer also benefits those groups that live longer now. So we should look at strengthening benefits for those who do have a disadvantage, who don't live as long, who have had very low incomes in their lifetimes, and their Social Security benefits are lower as well. But I think it makes sense to increase the retirement age across the board, and also to index it for life expectancy. So when life expectancy goes up, the retirement age goes up a little bit. If for some reason life expectancy should drop at some point, I hope that never happens because it's always gone up. But if that should happen, then the retirement age would drop as well. And you take away, Congress is very, they procrastinate on a lot of these changes. And so by making it automatic, you make sure that it happens and the program is stronger because of it.
Thank you.
To be clear, though, would you change benefit structures for those who have lower incomes and or don't live longer? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just so that we understand the give and the take. This is one of these great issues that it's important to get everybody's input on because, as you said, you have certain people who live longer lives based on their background, their ethnicity, their income levels, and so on and so forth, and where they live in the country as well. So how would you deal with that disparity for those who may not live as long and or have lower income and things of that nature? And Virginia, weigh in too. I'm just trying to...
So the retirement age today applies to everyone the same. It doesn't matter what your socioeconomic background is. The full retirement age is the same. And I think that makes sense, and we should keep it that way. But there are certain populations whose benefits are too low right now, and they often also tend to be the same populations that don't live as long, whose benefits are lower. So I think we should target those who need benefits the most with higher increases for them, maybe a flat benefit so they know what they can expect for the program, and start looking at reducing benefits for those that can do without.
I think there's much that could be said for improving Social Security benefits for very low-paid workers. And one of the proposals that actually came out to be very popular in the survey we did was improving a benefit so that anybody who had worked at least 30 years and paid into Social Security for 30 years, no matter how low their earnings, could be guaranteed they would be out of poverty in old age. I think what Rowena is talking about, I've studied the Social Security plan of the Heritage Foundation, and it would be to essentially pay a flat benefit to everybody and take it away if you had other income, or means tested, a literal means test, the way welfare programs work. And that would be a fundamental and radical change in the nature of Social Security.
But it would affect people who make $160,000 a year of non-Social Security income. So it's not like a welfare program in that sense. It's really looking at people who can do without, who barely even notice their Social Security benefits on a monthly basis.
I don't mean to be difficult, but I did read the report, and in the appendix of the report shows the long-term fiscal impact of the full Heritage Foundation's Social Security plan. By 2030, it would reduce Social Security outlays by more than half. It's, putting all the pieces together, it is a significant reduction in the scope of the Social Security program.
I would just say it's not just about numbers, but it's about fairness and about targeting benefits towards those who need them the most.
This would be eliminating or phasing out, reducing benefits for high-earning seniors.
I think there's so many reasons why we don't do that in the Social Security program. One of them is, and that means-tested programs mean that you are penalized for having accumulated anything else. If you've got savings, if you've got pensions, if you've got earnings, your Social Security benefit would be reduced. Now, the Heritage Plan starts with a very high threshold, but somehow it ends up reducing Social Security by half, so I don't know exactly what all the pieces are. But the basic problem with the means test is it penalizes thrift. I think Maggie Thatcher said that. It's a penalty on thrift. Second is people pay for Social Security through taxes that are dedicated to this program. These are earned benefits. They are like a pension. This is not welfare.
So Social Security is already fairly progressive, and it actually taxes the benefits of Social Security recipients, people who make $34,000 a year, including their Social Security benefits. And that tax system is not indexed for inflation, so every year more and more Social Security recipients are subject to that. So we think that since you already paid taxes to receive those Social Security benefits, you shouldn't be taxed again on those benefits. So that is one thing we do away with. But in turn, we look at who really needs those benefits, how can we strengthen benefits for those populations, and then we do set a fairly high threshold because there are savings, and it does make sense to target federal government benefits that are coming from current workers, coming from low-income workers. Everybody pays payroll taxes, even those Americans who are not subject to any income taxes. We need to look at where do those benefits go. The benefits that are paid today go to retirees today and other beneficiaries, including 47,000 millionaires. I personally do not want to get taxed to pay benefits to Mitt Romney and Warren Buffett.
And I, in turn, would much rather that they pay 6.2% of their income throughout the year into the Social Security system.
Let me ask one final question. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. We're getting close on time, but how do we get action started? These are 5 concrete proposals that we've talked about. There are many more out there. Given the dysfunction in D.C., in Congress, how do we get some action started on this? Do we need a commission, or do you have some other thoughts on how to get this done?
Well, one thing I would say is to do exactly what we are doing here today, is to get other ideas on the table. So far, the conversation about what should we do about Social Security has been largely how do we shrink it? I mean, it's defined as a spending problem, when in fact it is a pension system for the long term, paying earned benefits to the people who are paying into it. And what hasn't happened is scheduling the revenues very gradually to match the benefit obligations, very gradually.
The one encouraging movement I saw in Congress just this year was that the Committee on Ways and Means actually put forth a number of Social Security proposals, bipartisan ones, some of the ones you've heard here tonight, but also other ones. And they encouraged public comment so that everyone, including you and here in this room, you could submit an email, a letter, and let them know how you felt about these proposals. So I think it's encouraging that lawmakers are starting to ask these questions and starting to try and find out how people feel about this, and I'm glad we're having this event here tonight. Now, the one discouraging factor is that because Congress tends to only act when forced to, the one forcing mechanism, like Virginia explained, the last time changes were made was in 1983, when there was a drastic benefit cut looming for all beneficiaries. That year, we heard earlier this evening, it will be in 2033. That's 20 years from now. If we wait that long, any change we make, whether it's a benefit reduction or increase, or whether it's a tax increase, will have to be much bigger and more drastic than it would be if we make those changes today. So I hope that that is at least an area where we can find agreement that no matter how we solve this problem, we need to be starting soon, and lawmakers need to start taking this seriously and not push it off and, like they say, kick the can down the road.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Romina on this point. I would also say another phenomenon that I've seen in Washington is for the last 20 years, people have not been able to talk about taxes. We talk about, you know, there are two sides to government. You raise the taxes in order to spend the money that you need to spend to have the kind of society you want to have. But we've been doing only half the job. Social Security has a long track record of being fiscally responsible, and policymakers have been able to raise Social Security taxes in order to keep its income and outgo in balance. The program is designed to be fiscally responsible. Maybe this could be a starting place to help policymakers think about, okay, we want this program, let's think about how we can finance it. And the other one policy option is gradually raise that 6.2% tax. One such proposal that was in our survey would phase in a 1 percentage point increase, phase it in over 20 years, very slowly, but getting started about 5 years from now when the economy is stronger. That together with eliminating the cap is more than enough. And what that would mean for somebody making $50,000 a year is paying maybe 50 cents a week more in Social Security taxes than you otherwise would have paid. We can do revenues gradually, but policymakers need to relearn how to do it.
I have a little bit of a different view from this perspective. Irregardless of what you all think the solutions ought to be to strengthen Social Security, and you heard different sides here tonight, at the end of the day, there is a reason why elected officials have a positive rate that's basically less than car dealers. It's because they don't listen to anybody and they don't speak to anybody about these solutions that are on the table. And ultimately, we as a society have to decide if we want to hold these folks' feet to the fire, get more engaged in this process, encourage our neighbors to vote. I speak all around the country to folks, and they always ask me the same thing. Well, what are we going to do about some of these people in Congress? Well, folks, at the end of the day, we have a voting population that only votes about 40% in off-year elections. So until you get out there and encourage your neighbors and friends and others that you know and family to participate in these forums and get engaged and get involved, you're going to have much the same thing. Because at the end of the day, policymakers are politicians. And the only currency that politicians care about are votes. And in order for that to be important, you have to make sure that you hold their feet to the fire on these issues and get them talking about them a little bit more. It would be nice, and I think both Romina and Virginia would agree, if politicians could have this type of conversation a little bit sooner than 3 days before a debt ceiling is going to be defaulted. You know, 6 weeks ago, somebody asked me what the plan was in Congress, and I said, they don't have a plan, because they don't even talk to one another. They don't know how to get together and have a discussion like this. And I applaud Virginia and Romina for coming here tonight and having this type of discussion and offering their viewpoints. So get out there, talk to your neighbors, get on earntosay.org, download the solutions from both sides of the aisle and hand them out to your friends and family. And start this conversation and say, we got to deal with this now so that by 2033, we're not sitting there going, oh my God, we got to fix this tomorrow. So,
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank our panel again for sharing your expertise.
We did bring some handouts. I mean, on our website, www.nasi.org, is the survey that we did, as well as some videos that explain Social Security, just the facts, and the results of all of our research. So feel free to go there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And thank you, the audience, for your attention and your interest tonight.